Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor, to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the Morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
In 1838, a group of Boston merchants solved an expensive problem. They had been paying for private guards to watch their ships. They paid more guards to protect cargo moving between the port and warehouses. The cost was cutting into their profits every single year. So they proposed something that would change American history forever. What if the public paid for their security instead? What if they called the whole arrangement a police department? That is not a theory, but documented history from Boston's own records. It changes everything you think you know about American policing. Because for the first 200 years of this country, there were none. No departments, no precincts, no badges, no uniforms, no one to call. The story of how that changed is not the story you were taught. Before 1838, American cities relied on a system inherited from medieval England called the night watch. Boston started one in 1636, New York followed in 1658, Philadelphia in 1700. The concept was simple. Volunteers would walk the streets from sunset to sunrise, carrying a rattle and a 6-foot pole painted blue and white. They watched for fires, listened for disturbances, and were supposed to confront criminals. If they spotted trouble, they raised what was called a hue and cry, shaking the rattle and shouting until nearby citizens came running to help. The watchman himself was not expected to handle the problem alone. He was an alarm system with legs. In practice, the entire operation was a disaster. Watchmen routinely drank on duty. They slept through their shifts. Some communities required watchmen to call out the hour aloud, not to inform the public, but to prove the watchman was still awake. And here is the detail that reframes the entire system. In many colonies, night watch duty was assigned as punishment. If you committed a petty crime, your sentence might be walking the streets at night pretending to keep other people safe. The person protecting your neighborhood might be doing it because he got caught stealing from someone else's. It gets worse. Every able-bodied man could be called to serve on the watch. But if you were wealthy enough, you could pay a substitute. And who did the wealthy hire? According to crime historian Gary Potter, the substitutes were often criminals and community thugs. So the choice was this. Your street was either patrolled by a convicted criminal serving a sentence or a hired criminal paid by someone rich enough to avoid the duty himself. That was the system. For 200 years, the constables who supervised the night watch were barely better. They worked on a fee basis, paid per warrant served. Their income depended not on preventing crime, but on processing it. The more warrants they served, the more they earned. The more arrests they made, the better their year. Nobody measured whether the neighborhood was safe. Nobody counted crimes prevented. The only metric was crimes processed for payment. This was not public safety. This was a business model. And nobody rich enough to matter was complaining because they had private security. While the North ran this broken volunteer operation, the South built something entirely different. In 1704, the Carolina colonies established the first formal slave patrols, groups of armed white men on horseback authorized to stop, search, and brutalize enslaved people found without written permission from their enslaver. Virginia followed in 1727, North Carolina in 1753. By the end of the century, every slaveholding state had them. The patrol oath required men to swear they would search for guns, swords, and other weapons among the enslaved. That oath is the earliest known sworn statement of American law enforcement, not a promise to protect citizens, a promise to search for weapons among people being held against their will. These were not informal posses. These were organized, government-sanctioned forces with specific jurisdictions and regular schedules. By 1837, Charleston's slave patrol had over 100 officers. That made it the largest organized policing force in America. Larger than any city's night watch, larger than any constable system in the North. The first professional law enforcement apparatus in this country was not designed to stop crime. It was designed to stop freedom. Now, here is where the standard explanation comes in, and it deserves a fair hearing. Cities were growing explosively in the early 1800s. New York's population hit 400,000. The night watch of 80 men was laughably inadequate for a city that size. Crime was rising, riots were frequent, immigration was accelerating, and with it, social friction. Something had to change, and the British model of professional policing, created by Robert Peel in London in 1829, offered a template. All of that is true. I am not disputing that cities needed better systems. The night watch was genuinely failing. What I am questioning is who the new system was designed for, because the evidence points somewhere very specific, and it is not toward the general public. Boston in 1838 was one of the largest shipping centers in America. Merchants had been spending their own money on private guards to protect property at the port and along trade routes. Then someone realized the math could work differently. If protecting commercial goods could be reframed as a matter of collective public safety, the cost would shift from merchants to taxpayers. The city created the day police. 6 officers working under the city marshal, the first publicly funded police force in American history. Not created by a vote of citizens demanding protection, created by commercial interests who found a way to make everyone else pay their security bills. The full Boston Police Department followed in 1854 with 250 officers. Each one paid $2 per shift. Their primary task was maintaining order, which in practice meant protecting property and controlling the populations that threatened commercial activity. New York followed in 1845. The state legislature authorized up to 800 officers. And what happened next should concern anyone who believes the system was designed to function. The officers refused to wear uniforms, not quietly. They organized a public rally that drew 1,500 people. Officers stood before the crowd and called the proposed uniform a badge of civility. They declared they were no serfs. They said that being forced to identify themselves as police would bury popular freedom. Some were dismissed for refusing to comply. They appealed to the courts. It took 8 years of bitter public debate before New York finally adopted uniforms in 1853. The first outfit was a leather helmet, a blue frock coat buttoned to the neck, and grey trousers with a black stripe. 20 years later, in 1874, officers still reported that wearing the uniform drew insulting remarks from the public. These men were hired to keep order. They carried 14-inch clubs, and they did not want anyone to know they were police. The public did not want to know either. Both sides distrusted the institution from its first day. There was no training. None. Officers were appointed for 1 or 2 year terms, nominated by the alderman of whatever political ward they lived in. If the ward leader liked you, you got a badge. If he did not, you were gone. By the 1870s, the Tammany Hall political machine controlled nearly every appointment in the New York department. Positions were bought and sold openly. The police did not serve the public. They served whoever had enough political power to put them on the street. I spent 3 weeks with this material before I could figure out how to present it. Not because the evidence is thin, the opposite. There is so much documented so plainly in sources that are not obscure or contested that the real difficulty is explaining why none of it is common knowledge. I kept circling back to one thing that genuinely troubled me. The Boston Police Department's own official website describes its history. It lists the dates. It names the night watch. It mentions the day police of 1838. All of this information is right there, publicly available on a government website. There is no cover-up. There is no conspiracy of silence. There is just a version of the story with the financial motivation edited out, told so flatly that nobody thinks to ask who benefited. You learn about the Boston Tea Party in school. You learn about the Constitutional Convention. You do not learn that the first police officers in American history were merchant-funded guards who refused to be identified and served at the pleasure of political bosses. That omission is not accidental. It is structural. The same way you do not learn that America had no birth certificates until the early 1900s, or that street addresses were invented for purposes that had nothing to do with mail delivery, and the structure broke down faster than anyone expected. 12 years after New York created its police force, the city had 2 of them. Mayor Fernando Wood controlled the municipal police, a force loyal to his democratic political machine. In 1857, the Republican state legislature created a new metropolitan police force to replace Wood's men. Wood refused to disband. On June 16, 1857, the two forces attacked each other on the steps of City Hall. Officers in blue fought officers in blue. Neither side knew which force had legal authority. One contemporary account described 5 Points criminals dancing in the streets while the two police forces brawled. Arrests made by one force were overturned by the other. Suspects were captured by municipal officers and immediately released by metropolitan officers. The entire concept of law and order collapsed into farce. The National Guard had to be called in. The State Court of Appeals eventually ruled the Metropolitan Police legitimate. 12 years. That is how long it took for American policing to descend into a physical war with itself. The institution was so thoroughly controlled by political interests that two rival power structures created two rival armies, and the citizens those armies were supposed to protect watched from the sidelines while their taxes funded both. Follow the money forward, and the pattern holds. By the 1880s, NYPD Superintendent Thomas Burns had accumulated personal wealth of $350,000. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly $9.6 million today. Where did a police superintendent get that kind of money? From investments, made on his behalf by Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould. Two of the wealthiest men in America were personally enriching the head of the city's police force. In exchange, the NYPD provided what historians describe as the ruthless suppression of unions and political dissent. The city's bankers, stockbrokers, and real estate developers tolerated police corruption because the police kept their boots on the throat of organized labor. Taxpayers funded the force. The wealthy directed it. The superintendent pocketed the gratitude. That triangle is not an aberration. It is the blueprint. And it's scaled. By the 1880s, every major American city had a police department, all publicly funded, all modeled on the same basic structure, all answering not to voters but to political machines and commercial interests. The expansion was driven not by rising crime alone, but by the need to control labor. Waves of Irish, Italian, German, and Eastern European immigrants were arriving in cities. They were forming unions, they were organizing strikes, they were demanding better wages. And the people who profited from their labor needed a publicly funded mechanism to keep them working. That is not speculation. Crime historian Gary Potter documents that fears of labor, union organizers, and immigrant populations drove the expansion of police forces across every major city by the end of the century. If your family came through Ellis Island, if your great-grandparents worked the docks or the factories or the railroads, consider this. The police force in their city was not built to protect them. It was built to manage them. Think about what this means for you right now. The structure has not changed. The badges look different. The training exists now, in theory. But the financial architecture is identical. Total government spending on policing in the United States reached $237.7 billion in 2024, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The NYPD's budget alone exceeds $5.4 billion annually. In most American cities, policing is the single largest line item in the general fund. 40 to 60% of everything the city spends. You fund this every year. A system that began because a group of shipping merchants in 1838 decided their private security costs should become your problem. I want to be careful here. The point is not that police serve no purpose or that public safety is unimportant. That is an easy dismissal that avoids the harder question. The question is whether an institution engineered from its first hour to serve commercial interests was ever structurally capable of serving the public. One that was controlled from its first decade by political machines, corrupted from its first generation by financial elites. The night watchmen were drunks and criminals. The slave patrols were state-sponsored terror. The first police departments were merchant-funded, politically operated patronage systems. Each phase was built on the foundation of the last, not reformed, absorbed, expanded, renamed. You walk past police stations every day. You see the cruisers parked on your block. You dial the number without thinking. It feels permanent, like something that has always been here. But it has not always been here. For most of American history, it was not here at all. And when it arrived not because citizens demanded protection. It arrived because someone with money realized they could make the public pay for what they used to pay for themselves. The receipts survive. The timeline is clean. The names are in the public record. The question nobody puts in the textbooks is the one that matters most. If the people who built this system did not build it for you, then who was it built for? And if it is still running on the same financial architecture 2 centuries later, is it possible the answer has not changed? $237 billion a year. Same architecture. Same question. The night watchman's rattles went silent a long time ago. The 6-foot poles were retired. The slave patrols lost their legal authority in 1865 and reorganized under different names. But the bills never stopped coming. They just got bigger. And the line between who pays and who benefits has never been fully redrawn. $237 billion every year, taken from the public to fund an institution that the public never designed, never requested, and was never given the chance to build from scratch. It was designed that way in 1838, and nobody redesigned it since. The merchants are gone. The invoice remains.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.